Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
My name is Melvin Sax. I live in Great Neck, Long Island, and have lived here since 1947. I was a naval officer in the Second World War and reached the rank of Lieutenant senior grade, and late in the war took command of the LST 1002. One story I would like to relate is at the time of Pearl Harbor, I was a senior at the City College of New York, and I was directed to, shortly thereafter that date, I was directed to report to the draft board either February or March of 1942. My friends and myself made a choice to try to get into other services than the Army, and we applied for a program that was called the Navy V7 program. To qualify, you had to be between the ages of 20 and 26, a junior or a senior at college or a college graduate, in good health, and your background was checked by the Naval Intelligence. It was called the 90-Day Wonder Program, or at least it was referred to as that, because at the end of 90 days of training, you became an ensign, a commissioned officer in the United States Navy, and sent out to the fleet. I had my training at the University of Notre Dame. We were the first midshipman class to be at the university for that training. Immediately after my commissioning, I reported to the Naval Amphibious Base in Solomons, Maryland, to pick up new ships that were being built, well, in our case, in Evansville, Indiana. They were called LSTs, which were large landing ships. I went out with a crew and picked up a ship in Evansville, Indiana, the LST 173, took it down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, and from there to the Chesapeake Bay area. Upon arrival, we discovered that we had just missed a convoy that was going to, I think, for the invasion of North Africa. I'm not sure if that was the proper invasion. There were 3 LSTs. As a result, we were made a training group in the Chesapeake Bay, training these newly formed crews that were going to pick up LSTs. They stayed aboard our ship for 2 weeks. Each one was being trained by the one on ship's crew who had the particular job. We continued doing that training for a number of months. And then we were brought back into the Navy Yard to be sent over prepared for another invasion, I believe, of Southern Europe. Going up the channel to the Navy Yard, I had an earache. As soon as we tied up to the dock and went over to the Naval Hospital, it turned out I had the mumps. As a result, I was taken off the ship. My gear had to be put ashore, and sent to me at the hospital, and the ship sailed without me. Upon recovering from the mumps, I was assigned back to the amphibious base in Solomons, Maryland, still an ensign, and probably the only ensign in the United States Navy that was stateside that had 6 or 8 months sea duty aboard an LST. As a result, I was assigned to another new crew as the executive officer. We picked up a ship in the Boston Navy Yard, the LST 1002, and went overseas, made the invasion of Normandy invasion. Didn't arrive on D-Day. We got there, luckily, several weeks after D-Day. Made several runs between England and the Normandy beaches. Made one run to the Brittany Beach area near Mont Saint-Michel, and then was sent back to the States. After coming and to New York, we tied up actually in New York City at Pier 50-something, I don't recall the exact pier number. After being put back into shape, we proceeded out to the Pacific, made a little late again, the Iwo Jima invasion, and then the Okinawa invasion. During the Okinawa invasion, after our home port was, main base was Saipan. We would run between Saipan and Okinawa, go back and forth. We received orders while we were at Saipan to proceed to Zamboanga in the Philippines to pick up elements of, I believe, the 5th Marine Division. We took them into China, landed at a port called Tacubar, and from then on, we worked together with the Chinese Nationalist Army. Sometime during that period, I took command. I was commanding officer at that time. Shortly thereafter, we kept making runs back and forth from Okinawa to back to Saipan and things, and then all along we did a lot of work along the Chinese coast with the Chinese, working with the Chinese Army. The war then came to an end, and we were out in that area, and we were put into the repatriation program. We would take the demobilized Jap troops from China back to Japan, and on the return trip would take either Korean or Chinese slave laborers that had been brought to Japan to work in the war factories, and we just kept doing that back and forth. So we had Korean laborers, we brought them back to Korea. If we had the Chinese, we brought them back to China. And on the return trip again, we would take the Jap troops back and forth. I was awarded, I was declared military necessity shortly after the war ended, because I was young and unmarried. I did not have too many discharge points. And when I became finally eligible for discharge, they could not replace me. So they declared me military necessity, which I believe allowed them to keep me 90 days beyond my discharge date. 90 days can grow into 120 days without, very easily. In any event, I was kept out there, and then I was sent back to the States, and not discharged, I was released to inactive duty. Sometime after I was released to inactive duty, I received an award from the Chinese government, nationalist government, that was forwarded to me by the United States Navy. Other than that, my story is like everybody else. I have all the campaign medals. I also have a French award, a medallion from the French government for my duty while I was in the European theater. And I came back, and I was very happy to come back. I was offered a spot promotion while I was out there with the 7th Fleet before I came home to Lieutenant Commander, and would be in command of either a small transport or a small cargo ship. But like everybody else, I wanted to get home. I did what I did because everybody else did it, and I was very proud to do it. but I wanted to get home. We had a just cause, a reason to fight. In my mind, war is only proper when it's necessary. And we had a necessary war, and we necessarily had to go, and we necessarily had to do what we did. And when it was over, it was over.
My name is Henry Davis. I'm a veteran of World War II. I live in Great Neck, and my story is like every other GI story, and there were 11 million of us, different. I served with an anti-aircraft unit. Every one of their stories different. My career began when my graduating class of Brooklyn College, 1943, was told, you'll be allowed to go to your graduation day, but then you must go into the Army. And they kept their word. In other words, the war was already on for a full year, but we were allowed to graduate. And then, miraculously, the entire male contingent of that class was sent to Fort Eustis, Virginia, and we were matched by an equal number of guys from Purdue University. And so you had the eggheads from New York and the engineers and mechanics from Purdue, all learning how to handle what to us was a gigantic cannon, the equivalent of the German 88 cannon used to fire shells laterally and to hit American or British planes up high. The American 90 millimeter gun was the equivalent, and that's what we were to learn. And so with 18 men on each gun, we had maybe 20 gun teams throughout the excruciatingly hot summer of 1943 in Virginia, sweating every day and learning how to run that gun. The Purdue engineers knew everything immediately. The Brooklyn College contingent were about 5 weeks behind at all times, but we all ended up knowing what we were doing. I became one of two key men on the gun, 18 guys loading the shells in. I don't remember half the other titles, but the two key men were the guy on the left of the bore, this guy, and he was the azimuth setter, and by turning his wheel, the bore moved thus, and there's the plane going by. I, on the right side of the bore, was the elevation setter, up and down. We practiced for days, for weeks. We went out to Virginia Beach, a whole 5 or 6 cannons at a time, airplanes towing sleeves behind, flew across the ocean, and we never hit a thing. With all that training, this was a very complicated gun. I was sent uniform, rifle, all my stuff in a barracks bag to Fort Meade, Virginia, where I wasted a week or two. And then my next orders were, I will travel to Camp Shanks. Now, Camp Shanks was the greatest secret of the war. It was only 40 miles north of New York on the west side of the Hudson, and nobody knew about it. Nobody. You can't talk about Shanks. And there, I was housed all by my lonesome, waiting to be assigned to some new unit. Of course, it would have to be an anti-aircraft unit. Now, I'll remind you that my 13, 17 weeks of basic training were on this 90 millimeter, quite cumbersome. This outfit that I'm now going to join is the 459th Anti-Aircraft Battalion, and it's a 40 millimeter. Totally different. It's like a cannon versus a small machine gun. No sooner had I gotten there for 3 or 4 days, I realize I'm surrounded by a bunch of nice hillbillies and not Brooklyn College grads. But in the Army, you learn to adapt. We got on a ship, a ferry, to take us to the west side docks, and there was the HMS, His Majesty's ship, Scythia, an old Cunard line ship that was about 25 years old by then. But the U.S. and the British and French and others were running out of ships, and so you had to get on any kind of vessel to cross the Atlantic. I should jump 3 years later. It's now time to go home with a million misadventures in between. And the night before we were to go to the ship, we were in Belgium now, 4 or 5 of us went into Antwerp, and we caroused. We drank, we went to the dog races, and we came back late. And the guard at the gate said, "You jackasses, your outfit is gone." They went to the ship. He said, go into your bunk, which is empty, no beds, no cots, no nothing, no stove, and we'll get you up early in the morning, you'll have breakfast, and we'll pray that your ship hasn't left. Imagine, 3.5 years in Europe, and you miss your ship home. They got a Jeep driver who I thought beats every New York City cab driver, because we told him our plight, and he zigged and zagged through the Antwerp streets, and the smoke was already coming out of the vessel that was still going to take us home. We didn't know where our barracks bags were and our belongings, but they being the guys that had stayed in camp, had brought us stuff there, and we were the last 5 guys on the ship. And I decided I'm going to make history. So I let the other 4 guys go up first. And so as a result, I'm probably the only GI in the entire American Army who ever was first on one ship going to Europe and the last to get on the return ship.
In 1942, I enlisted in the Air Corps. It's you go for training to be a pilot, a navigator, or a bombardier. One of the 3. Okay. And when the day that I was called, we assembled in Penn Station, and they took us to Atlantic City. And we were there for 2 months, like a basic training, actually, okay? We then, after a few months, contingent of us was sent to Syracuse University, something they called CTD, College Training Something or Other, where we learned Morse code. They took us up in a small Taylor Cub to get the feeling of being in the air, and a few other little details which I just possibly can't remember. Now, after that, we were sent down to San Antonio. And San Antonio was called the San Antonio Army Air something. And again, we went through basic training all over again. And then I was sent, along with other people, to Corsicana, Texas. In Corsicana, Texas, I trained to be a pilot. And I soloed after 8 hours of training. I was doing very well. And I really, it's not that I loved it. They taught you all sorts of Immelmans, stalls, spins, and I soloed like about 30 hours. And I did 60 hours, what they call primary training. If you pass that, which I did with flying colors, they send you to basic, which is a much heavier aircraft. It's closer to a combat aircraft. We flew BT-14s, the North Americans. And this was a base in Independence, Kansas, as I recall. And it was very complicated. We did cross-country, night flying, we did link training. I had about 15, 20 hours. And this is mostly solo. And where I was supposed to park